My name is Ethan, and for years I believed I was the backbone of my family, the good son, the provider. I worked hard, sent them money, and never asked for anything in return. But then one wrong text shattered everything. To them, I wasn't family. I was just their ATM. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. The phone nearly slipped from my hands as my mother's voice shrieked through the speaker. "Don't you dare pretend you didn't know what you were doing," she screamed. "We're family. You can't just abandon us because your feelings got hurt." I held the phone away from my ear, staring blankly out the rain-streaked window of my apartment. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside me. Just yesterday, I would have done anything for them. But that was before I saw the messages. Before I realized I had spent years financing a lie. It had started with a simple mistake. My brother, Ryan, had accidentally sent a message in the wrong group chat. My name was right there in black and white, but not in the way I expected. The family ATM just dropped another $3,000. LOL. Keep that gravy train running. He's too dumb to realize we're playing him. I felt a cold wave rush through me as the notifications kept coming. My father's response? "El Mayo, let's see how much we can squeeze out of him this time." And then my mother. "Just bought those golf clubs your father wanted." Ethan would flip if he knew his money went to that instead of medical bills. I scrolled through, my pulse pounding. Years of messages, years of them laughing behind my back, planning how to manipulate me. All the times my mother had called, voice thick with fake worry. "Ethan, honey, your father's heart medication is so expensive. We don't know what we'll do." All the times my dad had sighed over the phone, "The roof's leaking again, son. You know we wouldn't ask if we had another choice." I had believed them. I had skipped vacations. I had pulled all-nighters to keep up with my own bills while making sure theirs were covered. I had delayed buying my own home so they wouldn't struggle. And all along, I was just a joke to them. Ryan must have realized his mistake because he quickly deleted the messages, but it was too late. I had already seen everything. Now, as my mother ranted on the phone about abandoning the family, all I felt was numb. "Ethan, are you even listening to me?" I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around the phone. "I've listened to you for 5 years, Mom. But I think I've finally heard enough." I ended the call. Then came the knocking. A sharp, relentless pounding against my front door. I already knew who it was before I even looked. Ryan. Standing in the rain, drenched, his expression one of forced remorse. I opened the door but didn't let him in. "Ethan, please. I can explain." "Explain what?" I held up my phone, the screen still glowing with one of his messages. "That you and Mom and Dad have been laughing at me for years? That every time I helped, you were scheming how to get more?" Ryan swallowed hard. "It's not what it looks like. Mom and Dad, they started it. I just went along with it." "Oh, so you were just following orders, huh? Like some kind of financial parasite." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't care. "Do you even realize how much I've given you? $3,000 a month. For 5 years. That's $180,000, Ryan. And that's not counting the extra for Dad's supposed medical bills or the emergencies you all guilt-tripped me into covering." Ryan's face was pale. "I know it's a lot. It's not just a lot, Ryan. It's my future. It's the house I never bought. The trips I never took. The life I put on hold while you and Mom and Dad lived it up at my expense." The storm outside raged on, matching the one in my chest. "Look, they took it too far, okay? But they need you, Ethan. They can't afford their mortgage without you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Their mortgage? You mean on the lakeside condo they bought last year while telling me they were barely scraping by in that rundown apartment?" Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Please," he tried one last time. "Dad's worried about his heart medication." I stared at him. The manipulation never stopped, did it? The medication that doesn't exist? I said coldly. "Or the real one I've been paying for while they spent my money on luxury cruises?" Ryan's face crumpled. He had no defense. "I messed up. I know that. But they're our parents, Ethan." "Yeah?" I took a step back. "Well, I was their son, not their ATM." And then, for the first time in my life, I closed the door on my family. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I knew who it was before I even looked. Still, I glanced down at the screen. Message after message. My dad was first, telling me to be reasonable, saying they were just joking. "You know how families tease each other, Ethan. You're blowing this way out of proportion." Then my mom, playing the victim. "We never meant to hurt you. You're taking this too far. You're being dramatic." And finally, Ryan. His message was short and to the point. "They're freaking out. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. You need to fix this. Fix this." Even now, after everything, they still thought it was my job to fix things. That I was the problem. Not their lies, not their manipulation. Me. Before we continue, I want to connect with all of you, my incredible viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. Let's see how far this story has traveled. I put my phone down and exhaled slowly. I needed to get ahead of this. I needed a plan. Jason picked up on the first ring. As soon as I started explaining, his voice sharpened. They did what? He practically yelled. I ran a hand through my hair. Yeah, I was a complete idiot. No, Ethan. You weren't an idiot. You were kind. They're the ones who should be ashamed. I let out a humorless laugh. Tell them that. I will right after I help you cut them off for good. Jason had been my best friend since college, but right now he was all business. He walked me through everything I needed to do, things I hadn't even considered. First, I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic transfers. No more $3,000 a month. No more emergencies eating away at my savings. Just like that, the lifeline they had been so comfortable relying on was gone. Next, I called my health insurance provider and removed them as dependents. The representative hesitated at first. Mid-year changes weren't usually allowed. But after I explained the situation, Miguel, the guy on the other end, found a way around it. If they have their own residence and you're no longer providing over 50% of their support, we can process this as a status change, he said. That works, I said. Make it happen. The next part was harder. I had set up an investment account for them 3 years ago. It was meant to be a surprise, something to help with their retirement. I pulled up the account details and stared at the balance. $42,680. Money I had saved for them, believing they deserved security in their later years. Money they had never known about because if they had, they would have drained it dry. I hovered over the close account button. For a second, something inside me hesitated. Then I clicked. Just like that, the money was mine again. The last step was the easiest. My life insurance policy. I had listed them as my beneficiaries years ago, thinking it was the right thing to do. I changed it to a children's charity instead. By the time I was done, every financial tie I had to them was gone. For 3 days, there was nothing. No calls, no texts. A silence so heavy that I almost let myself believe they had finally given up. But on the 4th day, the doorbell rang. I walked to the door, already knowing what I would see. Through the peephole, my mother stood with red-rimmed eyes, looking like she had been crying. My father stood next to her, stiff with anger, his face set in stone. And behind them, Ryan looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. I didn't open the door. Ethan, my father's voice was sharp. We know you're in there. You can't just cut us off like this. I pulled out my phone and texted Ryan. I have nothing to say. Leave, or I call the police. Through the peephole, I watched as Ryan checked his phone and showed it to them. A heated argument broke out between them. My mother started crying harder. My father's face turned red with rage. Finally, they turned and walked away, but not before my dad shouted over his shoulder. You're going to regret this, Ethan. We're your family. I stood there, unmoving, until their figures disappeared down the driveway. They weren't my family. Not anymore. In the days that followed, the silence didn't last. It never would. At first, it was just the occasional text from Ryan. Short messages that I ignored. But then the guilt-tripping started. Mom isn't eating. Dad's health is getting worse. They don't know how they'll afford the mortgage. A few hours later, another message. The bank is threatening foreclosure. They're panicking, Ethan. You can't just let this happen. I stared at the screen, feeling nothing. That was the difference now. A month ago, those words would have sent me spiraling. I would have transferred money without hesitation. But now? Now, I saw it for what it was. They weren't panicking because they were struggling. They were panicking because they had lost their easy way out. They had lived beyond their means for years, knowing that no matter what, I would always cover for them. And now, for the first time, they were being forced to face consequences. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Ethan, it's Uncle Mike. I blinked. I hadn't spoken to my father's brother in years. I just got a strange call from your dad, he continued. He asked if he and your mom could come live with us for a while. He said you cut them off financially and they're about to lose their home. Of course he did. I sighed. Yeah, that's true. Uncle Mike was quiet for a long moment. Then he let out a humorless chuckle. I can't say I'm surprised. I frowned. What do you mean? Your dad pulled the same stunts on me 20 years ago, he said. Tried to guilt me into paying his bills, making me feel like I owed him something. I refused. He cut me off and told the whole family I was selfish. I gripped the phone tighter. You knew? You knew they were like this. Would you have believed me? He asked simply. I didn't answer. Because he was right. If someone had told me a year ago that my parents were using me, I would have laughed in their face. I needed to believe they were good people. I needed to believe that everything I did for them mattered. But now? Now, I couldn't unsee the truth. For what it's worth, Uncle Mike said, I told your dad no. I'm not bailing them out. I suggested they downsize, live within their means. He paused. He hung up on me. I let out a small laugh. Yeah, that sounds about right. Listen, Ethan. I know it hurts. I've been there. But cutting them off was the best thing I ever did. You did the right thing. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. Validation. Thanks, Mike, I said. And I meant it. The relief didn't last long. 3 days later, another text from Ryan. Mom and Dad are moving in with me next week. The condo is going into foreclosure. Dad lost his car. This is getting really bad. I stared at the message, waiting for guilt to hit me. It never came. Instead, I thought about one of the screenshots I had saved. Just convinced Ethan we're struggling with rent. Meanwhile, we're closing on the lake condo next week. Cheers. They hadn't needed me then. They had played me. Lied to me. Used me. And now? Now, they were finally out of options. 2 weeks after I cut them off, I was sitting in a therapy session with Dr. Bennett, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who didn't believe in sugarcoating things. Every day, I swing between feeling strong and feeling like a monster, I admitted. Like yesterday, I found out my parents had to cancel their country club membership. I actually felt guilty about it for hours. That's normal, Dr. Bennett said. You're grieving the family you thought you had. That includes grieving the role you played in their lives. I frowned. But they didn't deserve my support. No, they didn't, she agreed. But that doesn't mean you won't feel the loss of it. I sat with that for a moment. It made sense in a way I hadn't considered. For years, she continued, being the provider was part of your identity. Now you're redefining who you are without that role. I hadn't thought about it that way before. But she was right. After the session, I felt lighter. More sure of myself than I had in a long time. Then my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another email. I opened it and groaned. Your parents are struggling. They've had to sell most of their furniture. Your father's health is deteriorating from the stress. They had to apply for food stamps. Please, Ethan. They just want to talk. They want to apologize. The email was signed by one of my parents' old friends. I sat there for a long moment considering my response. Then I deleted it, because I already knew what their apology would sound like. Not we're sorry we hurt you. Not we were wrong. No. Their apology would be whatever they thought would turn the money faucet back on. And I was done being manipulated. For the first time in years, my money was mine. And for the first time in my life, I was free. 6 months passed. 6 months without phone calls demanding money. 6 months without guilt-tripping messages. 6 months of silence. I had expected to feel emptiness, maybe even regret. But instead, I felt something else. Peace. I had spent years living under the weight of my family's expectations, bending over backward to make sure they were comfortable, sacrificing my own happiness so they could live the life they wanted. And what had it gotten me? Mockery. Betrayal. Manipulation. Not anymore. I had taken my life back, and for the first time in years, I was building something for myself. Then, one evening, as I pulled into my driveway after a long day at work, I saw them. Sitting on my front porch. My mother. My father. Ryan. I sighed, gripping the steering wheel for a moment before stepping out of the car. My mother stood as soon as she saw me, wringing her hands together, eyes full of unshed tears. My father looked thinner than before, his usual arrogance replaced with something unfamiliar. Desperation. Ryan didn't look at me at all. I walked up the steps, keeping my expression unreadable. What are you doing here? My mother's voice cracked. We just want to talk. I said nothing, unlocking the door and stepping inside. They hesitated, waiting for an invitation. It never came. I leaned against the doorframe. Say whatever you came to say. Mom swallowed. We're sorry, Ethan. I raised an eyebrow. For what? She looked at my father as if hoping he would answer for her. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. For taking you for granted. I let out a short laugh. Taking me for granted? That's what you think this was. They stayed silent. I shook my head. You didn't just take me for granted. You used me. Lied to me. Manipulated me. And now, because the money's gone, you suddenly feel bad. Mom's lip trembled. We lost everything, Ethan. The condo. The car. Our savings. We had to move in with Ryan. I sleep on a pull-out couch in his tiny apartment. The country club won't even return our calls. And your father's medication costs have been unbearable without your insurance. I stared at them, waiting for it. waiting for the part where they actually apologized for what they had done to me. It never came. They weren't here to make things right. They were here because they wanted me to fix their problems. Again, I sighed, rubbing a hand down my face. You still don't get it, do you? My father frowned. What don't we get? That this isn't about the money. This is about you. About how you treated me. About how you never saw me as your son, just a source of income. I crossed my arms. And now that it's gone, you're finally realizing how much you depended on me. My mother reached out as if to touch my arm, but I took a step back. We've learned our lesson, she whispered. We'll never take you for granted again. I tilted my head. And what lesson is that? She hesitated. I gave them the answer. That you should have been more careful about getting caught. My father's jaw clenched. That's not fair. No, I said evenly. What wasn't fair was expecting me to sacrifice my future so you could live in luxury while laughing at me behind my back. My mother let out a soft sob. So that's it? You're just going to keep punishing us? I shook my head. This isn't punishment. This is me choosing myself for once. My father's expression darkened. We're your parents. That means something. I exhaled slowly, feeling the last remnants of guilt slip away. It does. Or at least it should have. I stepped back into my house. I wish you well. I really do. I hope you figure things out. But I can't be part of your lives anymore. Mom started crying harder. Ethan, please. My father's voice rose in frustration. After everything we did for you, you're really going to turn your back on us? I felt my stomach turn. But not from guilt. From realization. Everything you did for me? I repeated, my voice eerily calm. Name one thing, Dad. One thing you sacrificed for me. Silence. They had nothing. Because they had never given me anything. I stepped inside and shut the door. For a long time, I stood there, listening to the muffled sound of my mother crying, my father muttering under his breath, Ryan saying nothing at all. Then, finally, their footsteps retreated down the driveway. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly, completely free. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about self-worth, boundaries, and breaking free from toxic family dynamics. Too often, we're told that family is everything. But what happens when that family takes more than they give? Ethan's journey shows us that love should never come at the cost of self-respect. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a 2 in the comments if you liked the story, or a 7 if you didn't. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Let's talk about it below. And if you enjoy powerful stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Mr.HeartVibes for more content that makes you think, feel, and reflect. Your support means everything.